the month, so you may want to make a note of that for the next year. Hopefully doing it on that third Tuesday doesn't interrupt us with holidays and our personal holidays that we have going on between Leroy and I. So we're going to start a new series today. This one is going to be planets square the nodal axis. And we're going to start right off with the sun square the nodes. Before that, I have got the housekeeping slide down to one slide that you can just easily glance at your own leisure at another date if you want to. And so I'm going to shorten that up, and maybe these might be shorter than 2-hour classes as we get going. So again, we're going to start off with sun square the nodes. And so jumping right into the material, a little bit of philosophy with this theory before we get into chart example as well. So many of you might realize that evolutionary astrology is a knowledge-based system that is based upon observation and correlation. You don't take it on faith. You don't take it as gospel because somebody said it. It is the ability to actually look at it, observe it, know it, and understand it. And so one of the basic premises of EA is recognizing that a planet, sign, and house are based upon one of the 12 archetypes of the zodiac. And that planet, sign, and house are an interchangeable archetype. In other words, the sign doesn't mean one thing and the house means something different. The example here, Mars rules Aries in the first house. Mars, Aries in the first house are all the same archetypical principles. There is a history to traditional astrology where we'll try to make planet is this, signs that, and the houses means a third thing. And when you're a beginner to astrology, nothing confuses you more rather than trying to keep all of that separate, together. How do I do it? So if you can just recognize when you start your studies of evolutionary astrology, there's 12 basic archetypes or principles to grasp. And when you get that, then you can understand a certain planet or a sign or a house. Another example for you is when you're looking at a planet in a sign in a house, what is the representation to that house? Break it down to the sign. Then you're looking at a planet in 2 signs or 2 archetypes, if that's a little easier to understand. I'll show you an example with our volunteer chart as we get to that shortly with our slides. But I thought it might be helpful to just have a little reminder to recognize this, that it's always those 12 archetypes, and everything is going to come from understanding those 12 archetypes. And when you do that, if you can understand it from Aries to Pisces or first house to 12th, then you're also going to understand that cycle of phases and aspects from 0 to 360 as well. So let's just jump right into the archetype of the sun. And as we know, the sun is the ruler of the sign Leo and the 5th house in the natural 12 houses or that circle. These archetypes are always going to be the active polarity, which is energy moving out from center. They're going to be the fixed modality, meaning to persevere, sustain, and they're going to be the element of fire. So when we're looking at sun, Leo, or 5th house, we have active, fixed fire. Taking those basics will then help you build upon what this archetype is. And by the way, if you want some information on the polarities, modalities, and elements in our educational webinar on our website, public webinars, I did do a series on the modalities and elements. I think it was a 5-part series, and the polarities were contained within that. That's an area to review if you're a basic starting out with studying evolutionary astrology. It's not in your students area. Again, it is in the public webinars and in the educational webinars. So one of the most basics of this archetype, and I'm just going to say Sun here to save time, is that it is the archetype of creative self-actualization. This is one of the most simplest archetypes of the Sun. It is creativity. It is actualizing ourself. Just think for a moment of whatever your sun sign or sun house is. That is where you are going to be creatively expressing and actualizing yourself in this lifetime. Now, a lot of this word creativity comes from the fire element. Fire element will always relate to a special sense of destiny. When it gets to the second fire sign, which is Leo, then we know what that destiny is and we just want to express it, and we use our will to do that. But when we are looking here at Sun Square the Nodes in this class, the Sun is always going to be detailed through both the sign that it's in and the house that it is in, and both have an equal role. You can be familiar that you have Sun in Libra, but if you have Sun in the 4th house, both are equally important and both must be blended together to get a fullness of that archetype in which you want to creatively self-actualize. This also then will represent a desire to project this creative purpose that we have into our environment. We want to go out there and do it and express ourselves, Libra, through all of our communications, through our relationships, or 4th house on an emotional level in which we feel good in our environment. It's all of those 12 archetypes that the Sun then starts to come through and blend with a sign and a house. So as we project that out there, it gives us a sense of knowing who we are. I exist. I am. Everything that we talk about with this archetype of the Sun, all you have to do is think about the Sun being the center of the solar system. It is what gives life to the solar system. And without the Sun, none of us would be here. So you can see how strong the Sun is as a life-giving force for any of us in our existence and through the lens of astrology. How do most of us find astrology? We're introduced to sun signs in the newspaper or in our first astrology books that we run across. We start many times with this archetype in opening that door to astrology. Now, some of the distortions here with this archetype of creative self-actualization is that we get very subjective, we get self-centered, we can get self-focused, and we can do this at the expense of acknowledging that others exist or that others have creativity and a sense of special destiny as well through whatever sign and house their Sun exists in. The Sun is also the archetype of recognition and uniqueness. If we're going to go out there and create in the world, we want to be acknowledged for it. We want to be recognized for it. But within this archetype is learning to self-love, acknowledge ourself first. And to do this on a deep inner level, I am. I exist. I am me. And when we have that healthy self-love and self-acknowledgement, then this leads to being able to recognize what's unique in someone else as well. The distortions that'll come through with this archetype: narcissism. The pyramid reality complex is known with Sun Leo in the 5th house, and this is where we're on the top of the pyramid and everybody else exists below us. Think of any presidents of any countries right now in which these distortions might be operating. We will also get into that quality of what we would know manipulations when we distort and we don't fill ourselves up with our own self-love and self-acknowledgement first. We also get into a key traditional word called drama, having to, explode everything and make it more than it is because we're not filling ourselves up from the inside out. When there is no source of sense of life coming from inside ourselves, then it will create that insecurity. And we'll want to, go along and see how big we can be, how much drama we can create. So it is that archetype of love, giving and receiving. When we do have that self-love, self-acknowledgement, this archetype, the sun, it can be very giving and generous according to what another needs. And when we give as someone else needs, then we receive it the same way. Again, think of the life-giving source of the sun. It gives us that daylight. It gives us warmth. It gives us everything that allows the rock, the vegetable, the animal, the human, what all kingdoms, all species in biblical terms, to just, it's that life-giving force. This also then again is represented in this archetype of giving and receiving love. When it gets distorted, we have what we call the conditional giving. I will love you if. We give to someone expecting to receive something in return, and that can be across the whole broad spectrum. They can give us love back as we want it. They can give us, resources. We look for them to give us security. Fill it all in. Another distortion that will come along is the classic love affairs and love triangles that we hear about through Sun, Leo, and the fifth house. Again, this is when we're not filling up active polarity from inside ourself going outward. So this is where we will take those risks and those gambles to be noticed, to be loved, to do whatever we have to do. This is where we get exposed and discovered to forces in upon ourselves to learn how to do that self-love that is so necessary to start from with this archetype. This is also the archetype of children as a product of creativity and that creative self-actualization. If you think about this concept of creative self-actualization, what more can we create than a version of ourselves with someone else through the product of procreation, square to Taurus second, square to Leo eighth. Sometimes that creativity is not biologically or karmically or physically children. It can be anything, but children get included in this. And here we want to look at the ability of a parent or parents, our own parents, to be able to recognize what is unique about ourself. And it also includes the ability of us as a parent to recognize what is unique about our child or children if we have more than one. This is a healthy expression of this archetype, learning what is unique about ourselves, parents recognizing it, re-recognizing it in our children rather than projecting us onto them. So here's that distortion. Parents will then expect the child to be an extension of themselves. It's the mini me. And whatever I couldn't create or accomplish in the world, I'm going to project onto you. And you're going to take those piano lessons until your fingers bleed so you can be the child prodigy that I never was. And this can lead to, again, more of those manipulations, control struggles, the dramas that we were talking about earlier. Many of these words within these various archetypes of the sun can be exchanged as we look at some of these principles here. What will happen is if the parent cannot recognize who we are and recognize that uniqueness and meet that uniqueness, or we can't do it with our children, then it creates what are called emotional displacements. Our needs are not met. And so those emotional displacements then get carried into our adult relationships throughout our life. Daddy didn't recognize me, so I'm always looking for the man in my life who will recognize what daddy didn't notice. The lesson as we evolve from children ourselves and into becoming adults is, again, we must self-love and self-acknowledge ourselves so that we can then be our own source of creativity and source coming through us as creating, which we'll expand upon here. So it's up to each of us to heal whatever is within ourselves that was not met emotionally as a child. These emotional displacements, this concept also comes from Leo follows Cancer, fifth house follows fourth house. If we back up to the archetype of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, Cancer, fourth house, and it's our early environment. If we are nurtured as a child, if we feel safe within our environment as a child, then sometimes, even if a parent can't recognize who we are or meet our needs creatively as a child, sometimes we can learn to start healing these emotional displacements younger in life because we have that emotional stability or emotional self-reliance. If we did not get that in our early environment, it exponentiates any issues of parent not meeting the child's needs and creating even, bigger or more ingrained emotional displacements. Then it turns into what we call that bottomless pit with regard to the need for love and getting our needs met. No matter how much someone gives, it's not enough. And the lesson is that we have to learn to meet our own needs. I'm always saying in a lot of my relationship counseling via astrology, when you learn healthy self-reliance, which is the Taurus second house square to Leo in the fifth, you fulfill your own needs. And then you want a partner to be there because you want them to be there, not because you need them to be there. And here we're getting into that fixed modality with Taurus self-reliance, Leo coming into the love, and Scorpio then being that commitment that we make on an intimate level to someone. So this archetype of the sun then is also the archetype of uniting with the creative principle, capital letters, in the universe. That means universal source, evolving source, the creative principle itself. And this is going to again be reflective as the sun being the source of life for everything in the solar system. And without its life-giving source, again, nothing exists. So this brings in that lesson of allowing the creative principle to come through us, recognizing that we are not the ultimate source of creativity. It is coming through us. We are a channel for the creative principle. And when we tap into it, then we tap into what is unique and special about ourselves, and our creativity comes through us from that ultimate source itself. And of course, that distortion that we learn about here is where sun Leo, fifth house, will attempt to play God. They'll attempt to be the director of the play rather than understanding what their role in the play is. So we won't only attempt to play God with our own life, we'll do it with the lives of those around us in order to be in charge or be secure. So this will then bring into also recognizing the archetype of learning objectivity. And this is that polarity to the circle, which is Uranus, which rules 11th Aquarius and the 11th house. We talked about the pyramid reality complex, where the sun is very subjective. The universe revolves around me. It's us thinking we're source. And we have that shock of the polarity coming from Uranus, Aquarius, 11th house, teaching us, no, you are not the source. You are a channel for it. And so however that comes through, whether it's creativity, whether it is love, whether it is children, whatever, the details are, there is that lesson of having to learn how to be objective. And if we don't learn this with Sun through Leo in the fifth house, then the following archetype, which is Virgo in sixth house, that pyramid gets inverted, and we then become the bottom of the pyramid in Virgo 6, learning those lessons of objectivity further. So this then teaches us that not only do we want to reach for source and become a channel and to bring that creative self-actualization through as source wants it to be, it will then also teach us that the creative purpose must be linked to a relevant social need. It's not just creating to create for ourselves. It's creating to be fulfilled in society. And it's creating in a way that society wants what we create, has a use for what we create. And when we start to link that polarity, anytime you're studying one of the archetypes around the circle, the polarity archetype comes in to bring a fullness back and forth all the way around the wheel. And so we then bring in what we will call natural leadership and creative roles to be fulfilled for the good of all, for our community, for our society, for our country, even out for the world stage and the good of all as a human race, for example. And so this may or may not be a complete list of the archetype of the sun. As with any of these webinars, if you have any questions that come up, you are welcome to press on that little orange arrow, and it will open up the dialog box on these webinars. And Leroy is always running the Q&A box. You can ask a question for him. You can raise your hand, pressing that hand button, and ask questions live if you want to. So you're always welcome to ask questions on these webinars. Those of you who have been students for a while are familiar with this. So if there's something that I haven't brought up as to an archetype for the sun, again, you are more than welcome to ask either one of us questions. I'm going to move forward on to the next section, and Leroy will interrupt me if there's anything we need to know. I want to shift over to the nodal axis for a moment, and I want to shift to the astronomy, because we're not talking about a planet here with the north node and the south node. They are actually points in space where the moon's path intersects the plane of the ecliptic. And the ecliptic from our geocentric or Earth-centered viewpoint looks like the sun's going around the Earth. It's the sun's apparent path. We know from astronomy, though, that it is actually the Earth that is moving around the sun. And the north or ascending node is where the moon's path going around Earth crosses the plane of the ecliptic going above it. South node, descending node, is where the moon's path crosses below the ecliptic. Here's the visual. Here is the sun's apparent movement around the ecliptic. Here's the sun's movement around planet Earth being in the middle. Here's where the moon's path crosses the ecliptic going north, north node symbol. 2 weeks later, south node, and it goes south of the ecliptic. As we get into studying these planets square the nodes, we're actually going to look at where in a chart a planet is either on one side or the other and actually squaring the nodes. More on that a little later. But the nodal axis, that north node, south node, it actually precesses around the ecliptic. This means it moves backward around the circle. So it moves backwards through the zodiac, and it takes 18.6 years to reverse and complete one cycle. This will signify this reversal, this retrograde motion of the nodes, signifies a return to universal source on a solar and lunar basis. Now, the nodal axis is retrograde about 90% of the time, direct 10%. That 90% of the time that it is retrograde, you look at your chart, you see if the nodes are going retrograde, that RX that you will many times see printed out on your charts as you look at that glyph of all the aspects. If you were born with the nodes retrograde, you will recognize a stronger sense of destiny early in your life. If you were one of the 10% who were born with the nodes direct, that sense of destiny may not come until later in life. I was one of those people. I didn't find astrology early in life. I was in my mid-20s. I was very spiritually based, but I didn't know it through astrology. And I didn't even become an astrologer early in life. While I started studying it in my mid-20s, I don't think let me see, I'm trying to do the math here. I really didn't become a full-time astrologer until my late 30s, early 40s, late 30s, I think it was. It was more of just a real personal growth for me. First dozen years I was studying astrology. So there's my example of being born with the nodes direct, being one of those 10% who discover that destiny on an egoic level, nodes being ego. The nodal axis later in life. The nodal axis transit by sign takes approximately 18 months. Those of you who may be familiar, right now we have transiting north node in Leo, transiting south node in Aquarius. And so that works out to be a daily mean motion of about 3 minutes of arc. 3 minutes, 60 minutes will equal a degree, 30 degrees equaling a sign. Now, to look specifically at the South Node archetype, this is the soul or Pluto, the ego from the past. It represents the accumulation of all the emotional residues from all of our past lives. It represents security, as it is what is already known from the past, is what we come in with knowing. It will represent karma on many levels, not just an egoic or emotional level. It can also represent physical, mental, and spiritual karma. It is a point of familiarity, both on a positive and a negative level. In other words, there are gifts with the South Node because we've built up talents. We've built up this knowingness. And it can also be our Achilles heel, so to speak, because it's where we can get stuck. It is so comfortable and so secure. We want to remain in it. It's the the fuzzy blanket. What was it? Linus, wasn't he the Peanuts character that always was carrying around the little blanket and the thumb in his mouth? That's security. Now, in specific terms, EA will say this is the prior mode of operation on an emotional level that allowed the prior karmic dynamic of the soul or Pluto to be utilized. In other words, the prior karmic dynamic was Pluto, natal Pluto, by sign, generation, by house, individual soul, by aspects. That's where the soul gravitates to, but then that would be operated on via the south node because the nodes are more conscious than Pluto or the soul itself. The ego's more conscious than the soul is. And the soul can operate through the ego, south node, north node. We also would want to look at the number of aspects that the south node makes to other planets to determine those other areas that are used in the past to actualize that prior karmic dynamic Pluto. And then we take it one step further when we actually look at the South Node archetype, and we look at the natal planetary rulers of the South Node by both sign and house, and the aspects that those planetary rulers make as well. This is going to give additional or more information about the past and how the ego operated for that security of the soul or the prior dynamics, the prior intents of the soul in past lives. Now, all of this is also true for the North Node. The North Node is the leading edge of development of the soul's ego in this life. How our ego is evolving in this life on a conscious level. It is our emotional growth and evolution. It will represent insecurity as it is unknown and uncharted territory. It will represent Dharma responsibilities because Dharma is the future. Again, how we're moving forward. It will in and of itself represent a sense of destiny or a magnetic pole to move forward, to grow, to learn, curiosity, rather than always being stuck in the past. So the North Node is a point of movement. It's not stagnation. It's moving. It's emoting. It's doing. It's being. And it'll do this on not just the emotional level, but it'll do it physically, mentally, and spiritually as well. EA calls the North Node the current life mode of operation on emotional levels that will allow the evolutionary intent to be actualized. In EA, the evolutionary intent is the Pluto polarity point. It is that opposite point by sign and house of natal Pluto. There are variations to this, but for the most part, that is where a soul is intending to evolve in any given lifetime. We shorten that up to PPP. So we will then also look at the number of aspects the North Node makes to determine those other areas, planets, that will be used in this life to actualize that evolutionary intent. We will also look at the planetary rulers of the North Node by sign and house and their aspects to get even more information on how we are going to be moving forward, actualizing the evolutionary intent via that Pluto polarity point. Now, the nodal axis is always operating simultaneously. And how EA described this? The past. or south node and the future north node are always in the tension of the present moment, the moon. So we look at this natally by looking at our chart to see where the south node, north node, and moon are in our chart on a natal basis. This will show us where we have a lifetime of tension, leaving the past behind, trying to move the ego forward. And we will do that through that signature of where the moon is natally, sign, house aspects. And because of that inherent nature of the soul to be secure, even through this nodal axis or nodal moon triune, the past will always try to shape the future in the present moment, meaning the past will try to project itself forward onto the future in any present moment. We do this again for those security reasons. And you look at how we're doing it through where the transiting nodal axis is taking place and through the transits of the moon, moving through a sign every 2.5 days. One more time, nodal axis moves retrograde by mean motion. So even though the past tries to project itself forward, the retrograde mean motion means that we are progressively leaving the past behind and making an attempt to move forward. Now, specifically, when we have a planet square the nodes of the moon, it creates a phenomena that evolutionary astrology called skip steps. It means that both nodes were active in creating karma in past lives. South node has some of the karma to the past. North node has some of the karma of past lives. And the planet or planets that are square the nodes, that archetype skips back and forth between those nodes, not integrating the archetypal lessons of whatever planet or planets are involved. In other words, that planetary archetype and its development or evolution is arrested, so to speak. It's stuck. It keeps going back and forth between the two nodes whenever one of those nodes gets emotionally scary or insecure, and it doesn't integrate emotionally how that planet is trying to move forward. Now, Jeffrey Green would teach that there was an exception to this rule, and that was when the sun was square the nodes. It's almost like, how do you skip or eclipse the sun as the giver of life? And how I've learned to interpret that, over 30 plus years of studying EA, is that the sun still square the nodes, and the karma is still there from the past with both nodes, and the sun can still skip back and forth to those nodes. It may or may not be evolving and creatively expressing itself. That's where you have to bring in that observe, correlate, observe, correlate, observe, correlate. So we'll look and see where that might be active in our chart example here coming up. When you have planets square the nodes and that planet skips back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it's just like this circle that just keeps on going, we have to look for a way out. And in EA, we call that the resolution node. And this is how we are working to evolve through these skip steps of bouncing back and forth. And we look to the node that last passed over the planet. And remember, when we have the mean motion of retrograde of the nodes, that means they move clockwise around the circle or the zodiac. And the way that we find that resolution node, we start with the planet and we go clockwise to see which is the first node that we will come to. So here's some examples of this. First of all, backing up, this is how you determine aspects to the nodal axis in general. All planets are moved clockwise, or excuse me, the nodes are moved clockwise from all planets. I taught Jeffrey Wolf Green's School of Evolutionary Astrology from 2002 to 2008. And one of the first things my Pluto Virgo did was create this graph. And there was another colleague, bless her soul, she's in spirit world, and she went back through Jeffrey Green's old message board at the time. And what she noted was that this is what Jeffrey Green said 70% of the time. The other 30%, he would mix it up and say, you know, different other things. And so many of us came to a consensus agreement that we start with the planet, whether it's the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, what. The nodes were compared to the planets. So in this case, we're starting with Uranus. And with this outer circle, we go all the way around clockwise until we get to the north node. And the north node, while it's conjunct Uranus, it's a balsamic conjunction. It is approaching Uranus. If that north node was right here, starting with Uranus, it would be a new phase conjunction. Starting with the inner circle, starting with the planet, in this example, Uranus, we go clockwise around the circle almost halfway. We go 179 degrees in a few minutes, and the south node is making a gibbous opposition to Uranus. It is less than 180 degrees. If that south node was at 20 or 21 degrees, it would be a full phase opposition to Uranus. So this was my generic example of comparing the nodes to any planets. Okay, if you start with Saturn, the north node is new phase. I'm not doing any math right now. I'm just kind of glancing at it. It's new phase to Saturn. The north node is you know, new phase, crescent phase from almost all these planets right here. Again, you can have this to review. If this is going too fast for you, go back to, oh gosh, I think it was 2014 when I first started doing webinars. I go back and do the basics of the cycle of phases and aspects for you, breaking it down. All you got to do is in the students area, do a search, cycle of phases and aspects, and I go 0 to 90, 90 to 180, and then I do a math review. If the math's confusing, you can do cycle of phases and aspects, math review, and I go into detail with that for you. Here's how we look at skip steps when planets are square the nodes. Here in this example, we start with a planet. I only have one up for you, Pluto at 16 Virgo. We go clockwise, which is reversing through the houses or the zodiac. In this example, the nodes are at 22. The nodes are applying squares to Pluto. If the nodes were at 16 degrees Gemini Sag, it'd be an exact square. If the nodes were at 12, it'd be a separating square. So here's your visual on the nodes applying squares. If a planet is, if the nodes are applying squares to a planet, the skip steps are increasing and magnifying. It's the frustration of an applying aspect. If it's exact, it is intensified and highlighted, and that planet wants to solve that issue of jumping back and forth between those nodes. If it is separating squares, it means there could be a prior life of that planet square the nodes, and we've been working on it already, and it can be a little easier to learn how to go into resolving those skip steps, okay? But this would be the node that we would be concentrating on to understand the issues here, and the arrested development with the planet. It all gets resolved and understood in this example through the North Node. Now, we're not going to go into the details of signs and houses with this case. This is just the math, okay? This is a visual on the math. We are literally going to have 11 classes because I'm going to include Chiron. So we're going to go through every single one of those planets with different examples. Sometimes the resolution node will be North Node. Sometimes the resolution node would be South Node. In this example, flip the nodes around. If the South Node was here, this would be the resolution node, and the South Node would be the resolution node. It can go either way. It just depends on any specific chart. Now, just for the sake of this class, I wanted to include the cycle of phases and aspects as I have drawn it up. This originated with Dane Rudier, to the best of our knowledge, with his book, The Lunation Cycle. And he went through the 8 phases of the sun and the moon. And of course, as you can see here, we go from 0 to 90, 180, all the way back to 360 again. So this is doing aspects the way we do it from planet to planet. And this is how we look at the natural zodiac as we go from Aries to Pisces, from 1st to 12 houses, but this is dividing the circle by 8 instead of 12. And so in Jeffrey Green's teachings, he took what Dane Rudier had put out in his book, The Lunation Cycle, and Jeffrey expanded it to aspects in general between all the planets. And you would take the faster moving planet, compare it to the slower moving planet. I don't have that slide in here. I'll have it in next month. I had to redo it, and my graphics artist didn't, I didn't have time for him to get that done for me. So we'll take up on that a little more in next month's class. And so that's the material that I wanted to cover. I'm going to move into chart example from here on. And so before I do, I'd like to just check in and see if anybody has questions on the basic archetypes in theory that I've covered here. If not, we'll move on. And I would like to check in with Leroy and see if our volunteer is
just a little confusion
on the class.
before you move on, Kim. There's a little confusion on why Jeff didn't see sun square the nodes as a skip step. Some people, aren't exactly sure where we got that. Of course, my response on the Q&A board was simply because we live in a heliocentric galaxy, and the integrative capacity of the sun, everything circles around it, that's kind of how I reconciled it in my own studies. Were we clear on that, or did you want to have any additional comments on that, please?
Yes. And what Jeffrey's teachings would espouse is point one. You're correct, Leroy. As we said earlier, the sun is the center of the solar system. And if we took the sun out of the solar system, all life would cease to exist. So yes, it is a heliocentric based system that we live in. We observe it geocentric from our Earth perspective. So we think we're the center of the universe here on planet Earth, but it's the sun that is the center of the solar system, and it is such a strength. Again, just simplify it back to the basics of astrology. We don't discover astrology through our Venus. We know it through sun sign. That's how old astrology is, and that's how basic it goes back to. Our history, observe, correlate with astrology, came through observing those 12 constellations around the circle for tens of thousands of years. The second point that Jeffrey's teachings would say is he wouldn't say there are no skip steps. He'd say they may or may not exist. There can be some skip steps in that creative self-actualization. There can be some skip steps when planets are square the nodes. The strength of life force coming through the sun means that most of us, one way or another, would identify those skip steps and solve them, whether we knew what the resolution node was via the language of astrology or not. So it was an observe, correlate situation, basically what he was saying. Clarify? More questions?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have our volunteer on, Leroy? If our volunteer's here and Leroy's in process of unmuting, you're welcome to just speak up. Can you hear me now as you're getting unmuted?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello, sweetie.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, thank you for showing up.
Oh, no, no problem.
And so I'm just going to very quickly for the tape, just give them your birth data, September 25th, 1964, 8:39 p.m. in Washington, D.C. You relate to yourself having sun in the 6th house. And when I did all of the all the different houses, I came up with Placidus. Is that what you usually use?
Yes.
Okay. I have first spirituated. You are in a long-term live-in relationship. I couldn't remember if you had 1 or 2 sons.
Yes, 2.
Okay, two adult sons, and you're a chiropractor, and you have been starting your own health and wellness metaphysical retail storefront business. And I can't remember, is that open already?
No, it's in the process.
You're in process of just really moving and expanding into that metaphysical world.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So let me now just do some of just the basics of describing what we're looking at here, and then we'll start in with some of your feedback as you've been listening to class. And so again, this is an example of sun square the nodes. The sun here is about 3 degrees Libra. It is in the 6th house. Libra is intercepted in the 6th house. If we start with the sun and move in that clockwise manner through the houses, through the zodiac to see which node we come to, we're going to come to the north node. This is going to be the resolution node. The north node is about 27 degrees Gemini. It is in the 2nd house. And as we see that RX right here, this is someone who was born with the nodes retrograde. Now this means the south node is going to be over here at about 27 degrees Sagittarius and in the 8th house. Now, as we start to work with this interpretation, and we're working with the nodes, and we're working with any planet square the nodes, that does not mean we get to skip the soul. I want to bring in, we'll concentrate on the planet square the nodes, but we're going to try and bring the whole chart in as we're working here. And so in this situation, we have the Pluto Virgo generation. Pluto is in the 5th house, which is the Leo house. So this already is going to show us, while Pluto generation is Virgo, this is a Leo soul. Leo, 5th house, Pluto, Sol. The sun rules Pluto by house. So that sun square the nodes is also going to be impacted here by a fifth house Pluto. And as you can see here, we have the stellium. This is someone who was born in 64. The Uranus-Pluto conjunctions were 65, 3 of them. So Uranus is balsamic Pluto, Mercury, communications, ruler of Virgo, ruler of the North Node by sign is new phase Pluto. So it's involved here. So this is a very strong stellium right here. So this is going to come in and be part of this sun square the nodes. Ruler of the South Node by house is the soul itself. There's another signature that the soul itself is going to be involved with sun square the nodes, whether we perceive script steps or not. Ruler of South Node by sign is Jupiter over here, first house, 26 Taurus retrograde, new phase, that moon gets pulled into the nodal axis as well with this ruler conjunct it. And then we have also the North Node ruler by house is Venus down here in the 4th house, the moon's house of rulership, in Leo, which is ruled by the sun, and in, it's just past a conjunction, so it's new phase, this Mars in Leo and the 4th house as well. Now, there are going to be some other things that are going on here. What I would like to do, though, is open it up to our volunteer as she was listening to me go through these archetypes and see if there were specific things that just popped into your consciousness as we were going through these archetypes of the sun and the nodes. In other words, I'd like to hear from you first as to what's bubbling over for you. And I will make sure that I bring in any teaching aspects that I see germane to the picture. I will also bring in any interpretations that I feel are valid and necessary. I will also say one more thing. This volunteer had a reading with me last week, which is how she became the volunteer. And I apologize, I'm not going to remember anything I said. So please, if something from last week stuck out for you, please share.
Okay, well, thank you. I think listening to when you were lecturing, a lot of things stuck out in terms of I didn't really realize how Leonian I was until I started listening to some of the descriptions about the sun. And, you know, one thing I think stands out is for me, I've had a particularly dramatic life. And I've always said it's not my fault. Somehow this drama just follows me, and I just try to balance everything, and it never seems to work out right. But I think also I've had a lot of action in my life with the 5th house, lovers, children, creative self-actualization. I maybe listening to you, I'm pulling in some of that stuff on a subconscious level so I can learn about who I am. I've been very reticent my whole life being in the public. You know, I was a very shy person growing up. I didn't really want to be shown in that 11th house. And maybe that's part of the Virgo-ness of my 5th house as well. But I've always been very shy about exposing myself in pictures and letting people see who I am. Although when I get in front of the public to speak and give lectures, you know, again, that Virgo stellium on health, being a chiropractor, I rock. You know, I recognize my ability to be able to lecture very eloquently to a group of 200 people. So I'm not sure, maybe I am moving into the 11th house, you know, polarity. And what else? There was something else that you were saying. I think the other thing is growing up, you know, my parents, I had a Hispanic father, didn't show a lot of love, didn't really, kind of an angry man, bad temper, didn't really point out, you know, look at any of his 3 children for anything, you know, special. And so maybe that was that area of my life where you do have these karma with lovers that you pull in, and you're trying to self-actualize yourself. Look at me, look at me, look at who I am, that you didn't get as a child. And then I think another thing, in my lifetime, I've had 2 love triangles, very difficult situations in my life. But that particularly stuck out because those were very hard times to get through. So yeah, there was a lot that you said that made a lot of sense. And now I'm at a time in my life where I am, so much of my life has been involved in being immersed in relationships of all kinds. If it's not a romantic relationship, there's been a lot of drama with children relationship and family relationship. And now at this stage of my life, I'm really kind of coming into my own, where I'm finding that relationships are okay, but I don't really need it. It's not what my main focus is, more about rising up spiritually and my profession.
All right. Thank you. That was very nice and succinct. Sun Square the Notes, getting your speaking skills going.
Yes, exactly.
So let me just give some feedback on that, okay? First of all, with that, I made a couple of notes here, and so not really recognizing how Leonian you were, and not my fault. That could be, one of the possibilities of Sun Square the Nodes and coming through both Libra and the 6th house, because both of those archetypes are getting orientated to the other, and they come off of that Leo in the 5th and the natural zodiac. So they're in a process of tempering all that 5th house stellium. But when I heard you say that, I thought, oh, Sun Square the Nodes, I don't recognize how much Leo I have in my chart. And so there is something that, let's go to this North node then as a resolution node. As you hear that, as you take the time alone to ponder and reflect some of the feedback that comes at you from other people, when you don't recognize ruler Mercury and Sun Square the Nodes, sometimes how forceful you are. This is what I'm seeing here is this is that quiet time for you to recognize this. And this also then will relate back to this South node in Sag and 8th. This is another signature of being somewhat of a powerhouse sometimes. Ruler Jupiter is 1st house. It knows how to bust out and speak up when you're being attacked, or you're standing up for truth, or what's right and fair for all concerned. So just looking at the South node coming off of this Pluto in general, and this stellium here that gets dragged into the 5th house Pluto, then coming through this ego of the past, you have lifetimes where you've either been in power, or you've had that ability to speak up and raise your voice, compared to lifetimes where, if you look at this Gemini 2nd house, sometimes you close down your voice, sometimes you go within, and you have to hear that inner voice sometimes when this isn't getting anywhere in trying to be forceful 8th house with listen to me, and we'll figure it out, listen to me, and I'll help you understand. And so this is that part of the sun then that is going, oh, I do have more strength in Leo than I recognize. So there might be some of that skipped energy and integrating how much there is to you and personality, creativity, sun. And then the next thing is that you said, however, even though as a Pluto Virgo, the shyness that can still be here along with the life force and will of the fifth house. When you do get on the stage, you do have that ability to then move the voice. And when it comes to sixth house issues of health and wellness, you rock, you can speak. So then that shows me that you don't necessarily have skip steps there, because what are you communicating here with health and wellness through that sun to this north node? How to survive. What is health and wellness but the ability to actually have, the survival ability, which is second house here on planet Earth. And you are showing them the many ways, Gemini, that we can do that. And you're integrating all of the health and wellness modalities and what works best for each person to survive and flourish, which is, bringing in the Taurus and the Libra, all of those Venus archetypes that the ruler of the second house works with. And then, of course, the third thing that, not to skip past the parent thing, because I think you explained dad and the emotional displacements, projections onto lovers earlier. You did that. You described that very well. The last thing that I wanted to say is you mentioned the two love triangles and how, difficult they were, and probably what a reflection back to yourself that they were, as a fifth house Pluto was learning objectivity. And we haven't brought in yet Chiron here at about 16 Pisces retrograde, sitting on the Pluto polarity point. And, some of the woundedness that would come through relationships and love affairs as you're really trying to heal self, to then be able to be objective in healing yourself. Chiron in general on the evolutionary intent, I want to heal myself and I want to be the healer. And how best do I go about it in ways that are fulfilling for others, society? So you've got the whole modality of healing yourself to then help heal others. But the woundedness of the love triangles, just Sun and Libra, square the nodes in the second, eighth, and bringing up all that woundedness that came from family of origin, maybe multiple lifetimes, multiple love triangles of multiple lifetimes. It did serve, I'm going to assume, those love triangles really serve to throw you in upon yourself, to again do that Gemini reflection, see it from multiple viewpoints, to then take you to the next level of your own self-reliance, hopefully resolving that issue of self-love on some of the deepest levels possible. Would you say that's kind of been the end result of coming through the love triangles?
Absolutely. Oh, for me to ever be as eloquent as you are with astrology, I really look forward to that day. But yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it makes you go inward, and you see two people's hearts breaking because of you, and your heart's breaking because of them, and it absolutely makes you question your existence and your survival and everything about that. No question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And let me just point out in a generic viewpoint for everyone, is when it comes to Sun, Leo, and the fifth house and the love triangles, the person who has the Sun in question can be the one seeking out the triangle. However, it can be the flip as well. It can be the partner seeking out the triangle. Either way, it just serves as a wake up to all of those archetypes of self-love, self-acknowledgement we talked about, whether the person in question did it or the partner did it. Both ways, it still shakes things up for the person whose Sun or Leo or fifth house is involved. Volunteer, any questions you have, anything you can think of that we haven't spoke up to?
No, I don't think so. I think you've done a good job at covering it all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's check in with our listeners. Leroy, do we have any questions coming from the board or any archetypes that we perhaps didn't flesh out that you're looking at the chart? Let's just take a moment here.
No questions coming in from the board. I'm looking for raised hands here, but nope. And just a few interactions on the Q&A panel, but I think we're complete there.
Anything that you see, Sun in Leo, Pluto in Leo, Mr. All kinds of planets in Leo?
Well, one of the discussions on the board for me kind of brought this into, I guess, consciousness for me, was having known this chart example, from several years ago, just meeting her, and you get these distinct intuitive expressions or intuitive hits on people. We all do, or else we wouldn't be in this business, I guess. I just immediately saw her as a reflection of my Leo energy. Oh, okay, this one, she's there for the real deal. She's in it to win it. She's a force to be reckoned with. And yet, what I'm getting with this Sun square the nodes is there can almost be this unconscious aspect to Sun square the nodes. You become aware of it through other means, i.e., other aspects of the chart, the love triangles, the overriding Virgo, or whatever is going on. But for me, that's kind of a hit that I always had with this chart. Was in meeting her, it was, to me, it was a powerhouse that was standing in front of me.
That's interesting because a lot of people will say that. And I think, your perception just, of yourself is never what others see. So I really try to express, I think, that Libra quality. I'm always trying to be fair and balanced, but most people don't describe me as that. And so I'm guessing there must be more of that Sagittarian 8th house South node that comes through. And in my mind's eye, I'm thinking I'm being fair, but I don't know. Am I being dictatorial? I don't know. I don't think so. But yeah, that's a good point that you said that, Leroy, because that is what people say often.
And here's what'll come through for you, volunteer. Okay, if if this Sun square the nodes gets unfair, and again, no judgments here. Okay, fine. I don't think we have anybody perfect on the phone call.
Right.
Or on the webinar. But when that gets unfair, or some of this stellium is coming through, and I have another note on that, what is Gemini? Gemini always gives us that feedback. Gemini always gives us that confrontation. You'll draw in someone who will be stubborn, second house, or, real intent about coming through and saying, wait a minute, blah, 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 blah. And they're going to give you some feedback of where they think there could be an adjustment in the fairness, 6th house. So there again is where this resolution node will be coming through. So it's almost like, back away, everyone, from, oh gosh, is it skip steps or not? Just use the methodology, and it's still going to help you understand yourself better. It's still going to help you evolve better. Now, go ahead, sweetie.
I was just going to say that sometimes I look at the Jupiter and the Moon in Taurus. That to me and the Mars and Venus in Leo in the 4th, between those two things, I can get real fiery fast. And I can get, like, if you push me against my will, that's when I dig my heels in and I get pissed. I mean, I have a ton of patience, and then when I don't, I'm patient until I'm not. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. And I've always looked at that 1st and 4th house and thought, that's why.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming off of Jupiter expands, whatever it interacts with. Okay. And so that Taurian moon will build up, and then the emotional pressure has to have a relief valve.
Yeah, and then the stellium in the 5th, I get real creative with my words fast.
Well, I just kind of wanted to back up here and just kind of add a little more into the stellium, okay? And, you know, one of the things that we need to remember about the 5th house, and to me, this wasn't ever brought out strong enough in Jeffrey's teachings, and maybe it might be because he was a Pluto Leo. In my observed correlations over time, sometimes 5th house Leos have very, very strong will. And I've run into 5th house Leos where I kind of want to push them because they won't exercise their will. They won't exercise their creativity. There's almost a lack of life force. And so then I work with them and say, you're a 5th house Pluto because you need more of that life force, and I exist. Now, when you take a 5th house Pluto and you overlay it with the Virgo generation, this will temper down that willpower, because this is a generation in most recent past that is going, oh, wait a minute, I got to think of someone else. I got to think of another situation. I got to, you know, so you have a mixture of that natural pyramid, and you have a mixture of the inverted pyramid. And if you think of the fact that the 5th house is going to be the childhood environment, and if you had a authoritarian parent who could not acknowledge the child, and you look at this, you know, let's just say father was authoritarian from what she shared with us. We're looking here at, you know, the tail end of Saturn in Aquarius retrograde. And, you know, this could be a traumatized father who then, you know, was projecting all of that onto the child. And so we can have that, you know, crawling into the shell here that would happen for this 5th house Pluto. And we could have that ego that she gravitated to. You know, 8th house will crawl into themselves when they feel powered over or powerless. And you add on this moon in the 1st house in Taurus. And so there could be early on where this was a soul who on an emotional and egoic level, you know, cowered in. They didn't have the perception of their will. Would you say, volunteer, this is accurate?
Yes, absolutely. For a long time in my young life. At my age now, no, but in my young life, absolutely.
Right, exactly. And, you know, here's the Mercury new phase, which is ruling all 3 of these planets by sign and the North Node by sign. You know, this is someone who has how they perceive themselves on deep soul levels, literally crawling out of the womb of the soul this lifetime. And every time the trauma, you know, was revisited, and coming off of having this planet, father figure, and Chiron, the wounds, you know, in the Uranus house, you know, there's the traumas are being revisited because the soul wants to heal them, and their structure of consciousness wants to liberate and break free from all of this old karmic wounding. They also want to resolve the ability of themselves to be the healer again. And so the trauma gets revisited to hopefully be resolved and healed, which will spur brand new ways of thinking and intuiting and bringing forth new healing modalities, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is some of what you've done in your work. Correct? Yeah. So I wanted to flush this out a little bit further. Also, with the love triangles, you know, we can also bring in Neptune, Scorpio, just inside the 7th house, 3 degrees. The confusion around what was projected onto the partner, what the partner projected onto them, where were all of the manipulations back and forth in the early relationships to get these emotional displacements met. Where were projections of idealisms made back and forth on the relationship. So just this Neptune signature will tell us that this soul is going to probably come through some lessons in regards to relationship intimacy from the karmic past by the South Node signature that are going to have to be addressed, re-experienced, healed on their own level. And as they do that, that will then affect their own healing abilities, and it can really have an effect on objectifying Pluto polarity point 11th house, Sun square the nodes, and how they're really going to be working to be in a relationship based upon those issues of equality and equal giving and receiving. Okay.
Well, I feel a sense of liberation. I think I'm going to go out and burn my bra. That's great. I love it.
Well, hopefully this has been a little helpful in addition to last week. And yeah,
Absolutely.
Go burn your bra and create like a fiend. And you know, I always have to give Leroy credit for this mantra. I will, my will, divine will. I use that for Leo, and I use it for Pisces, and every mantra works with Pisces. But you know, with that Leonian energy, I will, my will, divine will. What would you have me know, source? What would you have me do, source? And ask, you know, affirm that, ask those questions, and create the world within yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're most welcome. Let's check in one more time with Leroy and the board. Anything else?
Nope. We're pretty good here. You got a comment on a very good chart analysis. So there you go. There you go. See, you two are stars, Leo.
Oh, our Pluto Virgos are just going, oh, thank you. As our Scorpios are, you know, coming out underneath the surface and going, we rock.
Yeah. You got to watch the oozing Scorpio is the square to Leo. That's what.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Volunteer, for allowing us to know you through your chart and use your chart as example. All the best to you, and thank you for everyone showing up on class today as we start our new series. And we'll take it up next month as we look at Moon Square the Nodes. Oops, I finished up my slides. Before I do, just want you to know that I have, you might want to mute Leroy, our volunteer. Thank you, volunteer. Here's my next public class series moving into the fall. We're going to have Jupiter moving into Scorpio, October 10th through November 8th, 2018. We're going to do a two-part series, Jupiter and Scorpio as archetypes, and then Jupiter and Scorpio through the 12 houses. Here is the fall class schedule. November 29th, can you believe Mercury retrograde already? When Saturn changes signs, I do a 5-part series. And with Saturn moving into Capricorn, Jupiter's going to be moving into Capricorn. We're going to have the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, stelliums coming through in 2020. So there'll be a lot to work with as we get closer and closer to Saturn in Capricorn. All right, everyone. I didn't get my student slide up. I'll have that next month. We will look at Moon Square the Nodes the third Tuesday in October, whenever that is. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next month.